I'm talking about Ruth and her music. So as I mentioned, she was working on a Doctor of Musical Arts at USC. And then her parents became ill. And so we brought them to live with us for a period of time, her mother, and then we had both her mother and her father living with us. And so for Rees' PhD at the University of Wisconsin was interrupted by her having to take care of our children. And then the second time she started working on a doctor's degree, it was interrupted by the illness of her parents. So Ruth's parents came and lived with us for a period of time. And as in everything she did, taking care of her parents, Ruth did with such excellence and such care and compassion that the head of the Gerontology Center at USC said to her, in all of my work with families over the years, I've never met any family, my own included, that showed such extraordinary compassion and care in taking care of a mother as you have. And that was certainly true of what Ruth did, and making a place for grandmother and grandfather. And then her father passed away, and eventually her mother passed away in our home. And then my father became ill, and my father and my stepmother came and lived in our home. Our home was, over the years, a place where it was always open and many people came. We took in, as it were, refugees, that is, kids who had a hard time living with their parents, or we had one young man whose father had died, and he'd been our bishop, and he was a wonderful man, but his son just couldn't cope with his father's passing, and he came and lived with us for a while. When Ruth's mother was ill, we had a Mexican family come and live with us, a woman and her two small daughters, so that she could take care of grandmother. And then she asked one night, she said she had some relatives who needed a place to stay. Could they come and stay a night or two in our place? And I think we figured that one night we had 19 illegal aliens sleeping in our house and in our attic and in the garage and every place. But we also had people, as our kids went and there were rooms, people came and stayed in our home. Mary Bradford's son came, Steve, lived with us, and his friend John Taylor lived with us, and Pam Palmer, who was a graduate student at UCLA, came and lived with us, and Steve Reynolds did. So we had a lot of people, but also we had just, as our kids were young and dating and making friends, they brought their friends to our home, and Ruth was a wonderful cook. We had great meals and great parties at our house. And those parties increased when I was called to be the bishop of the Los Angeles First Ward, of the Singles Ward. It was a ward of 250 single adults between the ages of 18 and 35, many of whom I did not know because they were from all over the state. But being bishop during those 5 years was one of the great experiences of my life. And I want to talk a little bit about that calling. In some ways, given my relationship with the stake president, that particular stake president, I had somewhat strained relationship. I had been on the High Council before I was being called to be bishop, a couple of years before that, and the word came down that people in leadership should not have any facial hair. I had a mustache, and so the stake president required everybody to shave their mustache. In a couple of instances, I think maybe someone had a beard, and I just said no. This doesn't have anything to do with the gospel. It trivializes the gospel, and not out of a sense of rebellion so much as out of a sense that I just didn't want to participate in something that seemed so silly to me as to, and I remember having a conversation. The stake president sent we had regional representatives, and he came to talk to me to persuade me to shave my mustache. And our conversation took place in the bishop's office, where I later was bishop. But this was before I was called to be bishop. And so I said to him, Brother so-and-so, why do I have to shave my mustache? And he said, well, we've got to follow our leaders. And I pointed to a wall behind him, and I said, turn around. And he did, and I said, that's Jesus. He's my leader, and he has a full beard. I just have a mustache. And he said, no, I mean our modern leaders. And I said, look on the other wall. Everyone after Joseph Smith, from Joseph Smith up until, I think, David O. McKay, has a beard. And he said, no, I mean the living prophet. And I said, brother, sometimes when I go to the temple, in the film, the Father and the Son have full facial hair. And sometimes the brother who takes me through the veil has a beard. And he said, yeah, I know, that really bothers me. And I just figured, this conversation will never go anyplace. But anyway, it was a small thing, and maybe people feel that I should have been obedient, but it just seemed to me a silly thing to require that of people. So being called to be bishop, I didn't have a mustache when I was a bishop. I later shaved it on my own. But being bishop was a holy calling for me. It was a very sacred time in my life. I remember saying to Ruth, I don't know a lot of these people, and I don't know their history. So what I'm going to do is sit down with everyone in the ward, and I'm going to take 15 minutes. I'm going to say, welcome to the ward. Is there anything in your life that hasn't been resolved that should have been? Because if there is, let's get it out of the way now so you and I don't have to deal with it. And so there were a number of instances in which people were still feeling guilty about something or carrying some burden. And I said, let's get rid of that burden. Let's start over. And I said to my counselors, your job is to administer the ward. My job is to be a minister to it. And I saw that as my calling. And it was also wonderful to be able to say to my music director, who was also my wife, let's have great sacrament meetings. Let's have the best of the spoken word. Let's have the best of music that we can have. And so we did. I still, all of these 30 some odd years later, I am still in touch with a number of members of the ward, and they speak of that time as Camelot. It was just a wonderful time in which I felt that we could demonstrate what it's like to be a community of saints. I remember very clearly being taught about what it must be like to be a gay person by the members of my ward. I had a number of gay members when I became bishop, and then because I had an open door and spirit attitude, gays started coming from all over Southern California, certainly all over the Los Angeles area, to come to sacrament meeting and to come to some of our activities because they felt welcome there. Let me tell you a story about one in particular, Brad Murdoch. I got a call from his brother. He was from a large family in Santa Barbara, and his brother said, my brother has just moved into your ward. He's a little bit older than the average member of your ward, but I wonder if you would be willing to reach out to him. He's HIV positive and he's dying. I'd like you to visit him. So I did. I went and met Brad. Lovely, lovely man. He was musical. He had been in the first Saturday's Warriors group and had been in different plays, I believe, on Broadway. Was living then with his companion, Patrick. And I invited him to come to church, and he said, well, can I? And I said, certainly. That's a place where you can come. And so he started coming to church and was welcomed so warmly by my wife, who invited him to sing in the choir, and by all the members of my congregation.